So welcome to Code Mentoring. What's the day today? It's 2nd of May. This year has flown by. So for those who are watching on YouTube, we're going to jump into TypeScript today. So what is TypeScript? Why is it needed? Why would we not just use something like a standard JavaScript? And for what I was saying a little bit earlier today, there's some safety problems with standard languages like Python and JavaScript. So you can actually change variables and change things without having any kind of check to see if it's changed to something different. So what do I mean by this? Well, let me zoom in for a bit. The computer's running just a little slowly today, guys, so I apologize. Yeah, that's can't seem to type. Give me a second. There's how many people are on the call? 24? All right. I don't know if you guys can see this, but my computer's kind of locking up. Might close some applications.
Looking at the
I
learn.
will still look at your browser.
Oh, really? All right. Yeah, it's I think Zoom must be locking up my computer. So apologies, team.
And your face is scrambled as well, if that means anything.
Oh, really?
But your background looks okay.
All right. Yeah, those people are doing all right.
Yeah, you're kind of joining in with the background, freezing up.
All right, no worries. I'm just going to force quit a few things. Off to a false start. Sorry, team. See if this fixes anything. All right, can you guys see me now? Is it better?
Oh yeah, let's go into Slack now. And now VS Code.
Excellent. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, where was I? I was talking about safety. So what is safety, right? Why is safety a thing? What does that mean? So let's take a classic JavaScript example, right? So go into JavaScript. And JavaScript, I can say const name, right, equals Bruce. Okay, that's totally valid JavaScript. And then I can come along and I can do some stuff, write some code, and then underneath, I can go name equals 1. That's totally valid. Now, if I do some more stuff down here, right? Maybe we have another function, right? The function does something. Now, let's say I want to use the name in here, right? So log console.log name.
Tristan?
Yep.
Can you zoom in a bit, please?
Yes, I thought I was already zoomed in. If I zoom in anymore, I won't be able to code very well.
Yeah, thanks.
So when I'm running this function, right? What is the name? Is it a number? Is it a string? Right? We don't know what this is. Right? What type is the name? So this is one of the inherent problems of JavaScript that has been a very big criticism from other languages. Another example of this, in a very similar, so this is kind of the root concept, right? That they're going to build on in the transition from JavaScript into TypeScript. Let's take another example. We'll add a little bit extra to it. We'll say we have a function, right, that takes 2 numbers, right? Add number 1, number 2. All right, we're just going to very simply return number 1 plus number 2. Very basic function here. Now, what happens in JavaScript if I go add, right, hello, Bruce. Right? Or hello, 1, 2, 3. See, there's no error here. This is a problem. Because you don't know, like add, this is a pretty simple function, right? It's pretty clear that this is expecting 2 numbers. But what if it was something more verbose, like function create user? You pass in the user, right? And we pass this to some database thing, right? db.create user. Stop it. db.create user. Like we don't know what we need to pass into this, right? What is user expected? So we could pass in name, right? But what else? Like, do we expect something else? What if we pass in foobar, right? JavaScript just lets you do whatever you want to do, which is one of the nice things about JavaScript. However, that's quite inflexible. It's almost too flexible. It's like I don't even know how to work with some of these libraries because there's no guidance around this. Sad asks, what platforms am I using right now? I'm using VS Code. So this is a really good code editor that I like to work with. So this is a problem. Who can see this problem, right? Who here can actually see the problem that we're experiencing with this JavaScript and why, as our code base gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, how this starts to become a problem, right? What are some other things you guys can see with this as being a problem?
So I have a question. Does Java any order of precedence in terms of how it deals with its data types?
You mean variables or data types?
What data types? Sorry.
So what do you mean by preference of data types? Because
okay, so like in some languages, how you did the string plus
yep.
an integer.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So in this case, this would actually be casted as a string. In this case, because you've got a. So let's have a look, right? Let's go into the browser. So this is where JavaScript starts to behave a bit strangely. It's a good question. Coming from other languages where you expect it to throw an error, perhaps, where you try and join a string and a number together. Zoom in here a little bit. So let's say we've got come on. Let's say we've got hello plus 1, 2, 3. So you can see there, it concatenates it together. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah. So we get some strange behavior inside JavaScript. What happens if we do 0 plus 0, 1 or 2? 1, let's do this. What do you guys think we'll get? Do you think it'll be 3? Is it 12 though?
Yeah. It's 1, 2.
It's 1, 2.
Okay, yeah, 1, 2.
It's not 12. That's a big difference, right? Because 1 plus 2, that's, well, so 10 plus 2, that's 12. Or if the 1 plus 2 in strings is not 12, it's just a string. Very big difference here, team. So TypeScript helps you with some of this stuff. It says, guys, let's get more specific with what we're doing. That's why TypeScript was born. But it still gives you the flexibility and the niceness, right, of JavaScript and that flexibility. So that's kind of why TypeScript has become so popular recently, is that it has the benefits of a really popular language like JavaScript, but adding some things that make it easier for people who've come from another programming background that's a little safer, right, to use. That's kind of why TypeScript exists. And as we're going to delve into today, we'll see how it becomes much more useful and helpful as our code base gets larger and larger and larger. So let's start to introduce how we start to do this, right? So I'm going to jump in and create a TypeScript file.
Just a quick question from Sad. What if you do? You can see in the chat there what it says. It's 1 in quotes plus 2. So you're doing like a string.
So we actually did that.
A number.
We actually did that just before, Sad. So that's a good question. What does the team think? What does everyone think? What guesses do we have?
A string, 1, 2.
A string?
Yeah, JavaScript's going to decide on the data type.
Let's have a look. There you go.
Cool.
So you get some weird stuff. Now, obviously, I can come in here and go parse int. Right. That will give you the real number. So parse int is actually going to take that string and turn it into a number for us. And then we're going to add the 2. Now it will obviously give us the 3. That's a good question. Any other questions on types or why we need this before we jump into what it looks like? Do you personally, Frank asks, do you personally use parse int more than number? Yes, it depends on the use case. I'm often working with integers, so I find, particularly with strings, that they tend to be more integers, but numbers perfectly fine as well. Yep. Any other questions before we jump in? All right. So let's have a look at how TypeScript works. Right? What's the syntax? Because there's some extra things that you'll notice in TypeScript. Right? You look at TypeScript. It looks like JavaScript. It feels like JavaScript, but there's like some of these other things. It's like, what is this? Right? Let's have a look into what some of these syntax things are. So let's say we have, in our previous example, right, we have this name. So say let name equal Bruce. Now we'll actually notice a couple of things here. TypeScript allows us to get a whole bunch of extra features. Because it's so aware of the variables and all the types, it can run some what we call inference. Right? It's inferring some things about our code. You'll notice here we've got this error, right? Oh, that's because of the name. Let's change this to something else. First name. Right. So let's try and set first name to a number. What do you guys see? Type 1 is not assignable to type string. So this is what we're talking about. This is where TypeScript complains. It says, you can't do that. You can't go from this into this. So what we have to do, let's say we convert it back into a string, that error will go away because it expects this to be a string. Let's try it with a different type of variable. Let's say let age equal 10. Now, if we try to set age equal to old, get the same type of error going backwards, right? So this one's going from a string to a number. This one's going from a number to a string. It can't do this. It says, no. Like we're expecting this to remain like a static type, to remain the same, right? So that's how this type stuff starts to get very, very helpful, right? What about functions? So taking this example here, right? Let's just paste this in and see what happens. We've got this little thing underneath. I don't know if you guys can see those little 3 dots. If I hover over it, it actually says, right, parameter 1 implicitly has an any type. What's that mean? An any type. But a better type may be inferred from usage. So here's an interesting idea. Right? What if we don't know the variable type that we're going to get in? Right? What if it's like a const unknown thing? right, equals some function that returns something from a library that you don't know, you've never used it before, right? You're going to import that, import some function from something, right? So you don't know what this is. So this is where we can actually use a little bit of a syntax. We can actually go, you know, by default, this is going to be any. So I can come in and do this. Now, this is why any is kind of discouraged in TypeScript, because I can actually come along and say unknown thing equals a number, like this. Sorry, so that's all let. And then I can also set it to a string. Now you'll notice that TypeScript is not complaining here. So this is because this type, you see here, we hover over it, has a type of any. In TypeScript, right, you can type things with the colon, like this. This is saying in here, right? We don't need to do this because it's already inferred. But this is the same as saying colon string. Right, that's the same thing. We don't need to because it's already inferred. But this here, right, this is a problem for us because this is a type of any. So we might say, you know what? I know, I've looked at the documentation. I know that this returns a number. So let's label it as a number, like this. So that's how this colon is used when you're declaring a variable like this, saying, hey, I'm expecting this, right? Don't give me something else, because I know what this is, right? You can't tell me because maybe this is written in JavaScript, right? This function here from someone else's library, and maybe it has no type definition files and it has no idea what it is, but I know what it is because the documentation told me. So don't try and trick me, right? So now this becomes invalid because you can't turn it to a string. So that's how this becomes very useful. You can also deliberately, right, in the same way, this does the exact same thing. I can go as the type name, unknown thing too. All right. So these two lines do the same thing. We're declaring this as this type here, and we're declaring it as a type here. So you actually have these two different ways of doing it. It's the same thing. So that's kind of how any types work, right? Generally discouraged. Sherry asks, any number, any integer, decimal, what about scientific notation? What do you mean by scientific notation, Sherry? Do you mean like pi and various like constants?
So like a float number?
Well, it actually gives you like times 10 to the minus 6 or something like that. And then
right.
Often it'll go E minus 6 or something.
Yep.
Notation.
Yep. So that's actually not the type. That's the value.
Right. So it's still a number, but does it give it to you in that specific notation if you put it in?
JavaScript doesn't determine that difference. It just has a number. Now I think you could actually say a float. I forget exactly what, or I think it might be, they introduced a new one called big int. All right. So that's one. Now this here, see how this now has an error? Because this is not a big int. This is just a standard integer. A big int is something much, much, much larger. So that's like a little bit of control over that fidelity. But I think what you're talking about mostly is the actual value as opposed to the type. So they're all kind of going to be numbers. Or Shane asks, what are the data types allowed by TS? Great question. This kind of comes into our primitives. And that's a really good point, actually. I'm glad somebody asked that. So what types are allowed? So we've got our standard one. All right, so let name is a string. All right, we've got let age as a number. We've got let, let's say specifics. Let's say Canadian. All right, it's going to be a Boolean. Now, what do you guys notice about each of these types? Who can tell me something?
Lowercase or do you mean?
Yes, correct. They are lowercased. This is not the same as this. That actually refers to an instance in JavaScript because these are all built in JavaScript objects. When you do the lowercase, it's referring to the type. That is a very important distinction. Lowercase, right? Not the type, not the object. That's a really important thing to note. Like this, I'm going to change. Let me get rid of these. Comment this out. Right. So that's a really important thing. What else have we got? All right. We got a date. Now you'll notice this one here. Birthday. It said birthday. All right. This is not lowercase because TypeScript doesn't have that. It's expecting it to be right, uppercase. A date instance. All right. So just be mindful of those types versus objects. What else have we got? They're kind of your basic primitives. You have null, I think. Let name. Or let's say. It's another one. Like address. Right. You can set that to null or undefined. Now I've introduced a new. Saad asks, "What's an instance?" That's a good question. We can start getting into object-oriented stuff a little bit later on. Let's put a pin in that one side. I'll explain that a little bit later. So you'll notice I'm starting to introduce a new syntax here. Right? Who's used the OR operator in JavaScript before? This guy here. Right? Really common. It's a really common thing, right? We'll say if condition 1 or condition 2, right? Do something. So this OR is very similar in the types. Right? We're actually using it. Now you'll notice it's a single one. It's not a double. It's a single one. Now this, right, this address might be a string or it might be null. In fact, we're going to allow it to be null. Because what happens, right? Let's say in here, we declare it as null. And then later down, we try to say address equals, say, Toronto. Look, it's going to give us an error. Saying Toronto is not assignable to null because we're expecting it to be a null object, right? Not a string. So this is where this becomes useful. We can say string or null. String or null. So we're actually, this now has multiple types. So if we hover over address, it will actually tell you string or null. We could add another one in here. We could say date. Right, now address can be a string or a date. Now, as you go through with this, guys, this is going to start to get a little bit more complicated because the address becomes more ambiguous. You don't know what it's going to be. So generally, I try to discourage too many types, right? Too many types assigned to the same variable. Because when you're using it in your code, you'll have to do a bunch of checking to say, is it a string? Is it a number? And you basically go back to JavaScript land, or you have to do all that type checking yourself. So there are some cases where this makes sense, but let's try and keep it basic for now. Are there any questions on how we do the OR and why we do the OR type? Is this making sense to you guys? Who's following? I'm curious what we think of TypeScript so far, team.
It's pretty good to just to restrict any, I guess, random values coming in.
Yep.
It's similar to what I see from in React. We have prop type as a
yes, we do. Same concept. And that actually, I think prop types became a big thing before TypeScript was really introduced to the proper, like to the web dev community on a larger scale. So yeah, that's a really nice parallel into what these types are doing for us, for those who know the prop types. Cool. So what other types have we got? We've actually got quite a few. I'm not going to go through all of them today. You guys can look them up yourself, but they kind of be your main ones. Let's jump into a little bit more of a complex example. Right.
Tristan, just before you jump on, I saw there's a question about the OR that you were previously mentioning. So what is the practical application of using OR?
That's a great question. So let's say I have a function, right? And it's going to be something through, and then that's going to take in either, it might be a user or user ID. And Lee, we'll get to generics definitely. So this user can be a user or user ID. Let's say it's lookup user. Lookup, or maybe it's lookup password. All right, get password. Now the user, this is a really good example, segue into what we're about to do. So this is how you can type inside functions. Same. What do we use to type variables? This part here. Right. So we use this colon. And the same thing here in the. So I'm going to say this can either be a string, right, or it's going to be a user. Now, what do you guys notice about this? What do you see? What's this?
So is it like it's either gonna be a type user that we define, or else it's gonna be a string?
So you hit the nail on the head there, Rashad. A type user that we're going to define. What does that mean? Define, right? Type that we're defining. I thought we just had numbers and strings and booleans, and nulls. Does that mean I can define my own type?
Or you can say an object.
That would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? Imagine for a second that I could come up with almost like a blueprint for what the object is going to be. It's not the actual object. It's just what that object is going to look like. Wouldn't that be cool? Oh, well, how do we do this? Well, let's define this user type. So we have, normally in JavaScript, you do something like const user equals first name, all right, Bruce, last name, Wayne, all right, have age, 33, all right, maybe location or address, awesome, all right. But this is not a type, is it? This is an actual object. Saad, you asked a question before about the difference between them. This is kind of answering that a little bit. This is not a type. This is an object because it actually has those values. I can come in here and I can go log user.name or first name. This is the actual instance. This exists inside the context or inside memory. It's not the same as a type. A type looks very similar, but it doesn't actually exist. All it is a story that we're going to tell our code and say, I want you to follow this pattern. So let's actually have a look at this. I'm going to copy this code. Now in TypeScript, typically what you'll do when you're creating a type is you will uppercase it. Now it's not going to be a const. Let's introduce this new word called an interface. Interface user. And you'll notice we've got an error around this equal sign, so we're going to get rid of this one. And there you go. Now we've got this blueprint, if you will. Blueprint. Kind of like when you're building a new house or something. You design it first and then you build it. And that's kind of the idea behind these types or these interfaces. The same thing is that you're designing what it's going to look like. You're telling the code what to expect. And then let's actually go ahead. Who remembers how to define this as a type? What do we use, team?
Colon, and
yep.
Type.
Yep, and then which type do we want it to be?
User.
User, with a capital U. Like this. All right? Now, let's try and remove something. All right? So Shane asks, should a blueprint have no values, just define properties and data types? Great question. Jumping ahead, Shane, and I'll get to that in a second. All right? So let's go ahead and remove one of these properties. Look what we see here. All right? What does this say? Property address is missing in type, but required, so this big object here, but required in type user. So what this is saying is this object that we've declared, right? It's missing. We've declared it as a user, but it's missing this address. So why don't we go and add that back in? Let's say he's moved from Gotham, he moved to Toronto. Now look at this, right? Type Toronto is not assignable to type Gotham. So Shane, this answers your question. And this is the flexibility of TypeScript. I can declare real values like this and expect it to match exactly. Or I can set this to a type in the interface. And we're going to say, actually, we're going to allow this to be a string. So now down here, I can actually set this to whatever I want. And that's totally valid. But if I try and change something else, remember, these things are still hard-coded. So if we try and change his age to 34, that will throw that error again. So Shane asks, should a blueprint have no values, just define properties and data types? So it locks in the value. Sometimes, yes, and sometimes no. It really depends on what your code is doing. Do we have any questions on this so far? On how we've created a custom type like this? Are you guys starting to see the power behind this? It's pretty cool, right? in JavaScript, JavaScript does not care what you do. You can just put whatever you want in it. All right, I can grab this user. Let's go back to our JavaScript. Come back to down here. All right, our user, and I can have the address. Then I can go user.address equals date, new date. Doesn't make any sense. There's no errors here. This is totally valid JavaScript. There's no errors. But TypeScript goes, no, you can't do that. In fact, we won't even let you change the value. All right? We won't even let you change the value. That's so cool. That's so powerful inside TypeScript. It makes your code, all the errors that you start getting, especially as a beginner, guys, especially as beginners who are learning all of the intricacies of JavaScript and things. I actually really recommend learning some TypeScript because it saves you from running around trying to find where's that thing, that bug. You don't quite know where it is. Right? TypeScript tells you before you even load it in the browser, before you even build it. It just says, nah, right, you can't do this. That's very powerful. So that's kind of how we define our own blueprints. Now, getting back to, I think it was Saad's question, right? When would we want to use a type like this, multiple types for the same thing? Well, let's say, right, we want to get this password. Now, let's say we want to be able to pass it in two ways, right? We want to be able to pass in a string, right? 1, 2, 3 as the user ID. And so let's also add 4, 5, 6. Right? You'll see here, this is, if we try to add extra properties, this will also say, right? Is not assignable to type user. Object literal may only specify known properties. An ID does not exist on the type user. So even if we add new ones, so let's go ahead and add ID as a string. So let's say we want to be able to get it like this, and we also want to be able to pass in the user object, just for the sake of what we're doing, like this. This is what we want. So we want to be able to do this. Now inside here, right? Now let's say we want to return. We want to actually just determine what we're going to get back from this. Now TypeScript has some pretty fancy, what we call type inference, where it's going to determine, for example, up here, right? See how we're determining, up here, sorry. We're determining this was a string already, automatically. We did not need to come in here and type this as a string. It infers automatically. It does the same thing with functions. However, if we would like to, and sometimes this is good practice, especially for a complicated function, is you might do the same thing with a colon and tell it what we're expecting back from this function. So let's say the password is going to be a string. It's always going to be a string. Now this is going to say a function who declared is neither void or any must return a value. What that's saying is, because we're not returning anything yet, right, it's saying you can't return a string because you're not returning anything. So it's basically a to-do almost, which is pretty nice. So let's do something, right? Return string. Now that error goes away. So what we're going to do, let's pretend we have a lookup function, right? Lookup user. Shane says, seems like issues are handled now during development. Yes.
Just to like Kyle's question about performance, I was saying it looks like these issues are being handled here, and it might even be easier for the browser to parse this code because it doesn't have to think about it, right?
That's a great question, and we'll get to this later. The browser cannot read TypeScript. I'll repeat that. The browser cannot read TypeScript. If you tried to load a TypeScript file in the browser, it will not work. what we need to do, and we'll get to this later today, is we need to transpile. We need to take this TypeScript code and convert it into JavaScript. And that is a process that we will go through. If it's okay with you guys, I want to focus a little bit more on the language before we focus on the transpilation, but we will get into that later. This code is not readable by the browser. Okay? So to answer your question, Cal, it's all going to be TypeScript. It's all going to be converted into JavaScript. So there's no concern about performance. Cool. So let's pretend. Any other questions before I move ahead so far? Am I going too fast, too slow? How you guys feeling about this? I know there's a lot to cover, and it's a different way of thinking. So you guys let me know.
So Tristan, you're gonna be pushing this code as well, right? Commit by commit. This.
Yeah, I can push this up onto GitHub if people want to have a look. In fact, so far I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to put this, guys, in probably the JavaScript advanced. So for those who want to join, who join our Slack channel first, but for those who want to join this channel, you just go into channels here and you click the add channels button and you go browse channels. Right? In here, you just go JavaScript advanced and it will show up and you can join that. So I recommend you guys join this channel. I'm going to paste what I've done so far in here. So this is what we've covered so far. Any other questions? That was a good one. Thanks for chat.
Yeah, Tristan, another question. So I remember in previous projects, you already had packages that took care of installing TypeScript for us. But now in this case, does Visual Studio Code by default support that?
Visual Studio Code has TypeScript built into it and has for a long time because it actually is built, like VS Code is built in TypeScript.
Cool.
So it has very good native support for it. Any other questions on anything we've covered so far?
Hey, Tristan, everything we've seen so far is JavaScript, right? We're just making it more strict, stricter, right?
Yes. So that's a good question. Technically speaking, JavaScript is what we call a subset of TypeScript, meaning that JavaScript is valid TypeScript. Now, you might get some errors and things like that associated with the types, but JavaScript in itself, the language JavaScript, lives inside TypeScript because it just adds extra things on top of it. It doesn't change the way we fundamentally do JavaScript at all. It just adds a few extra things, if that makes sense. Cool. So Sherry asks, why not learn C#? That's a good question. C#, so for those who don't know what C# is, it's a language that looks and feels very similar to TypeScript. It's actually built by the same people, Microsoft. I believe TypeScript is, C# is Microsoft. It's used typically in like .NET backend language. It really depends on the use case, guys. Obviously, you can't run C# in the browser. So at some point, right, it's going to have to come down to JavaScript. So there might be some C# transpilers into JavaScript. I don't know if there is or not. But that's kind of the use case, is if you want to write production level JavaScript, TypeScript is really good for that, especially for very large code bases. If you're using things like React, or you're like all UI focused, let's say you've got a UI project and you're not a backend developer at all, right? You've just got another team in the organization. They do the backend. It's written in a language you don't even know. All you do is interface to the API, right? This would be a really good use case for TypeScript because you can't use C# because it's just a front end. And you don't want to use JavaScript because you know it's unsafe. So this would be a really good use case for why you would use TypeScript over something like C#. If that answers your question, Sherry. Rajat says for front-end web development, yep, so pretty much what I was just saying. Depends on the purpose, says Shane. So let's go ahead and finish this little function that we're doing, right? Let's say we've got this lookup user. Now, this user ID, right? It could be one or it could be the other, couldn't it? So this lookup, let's say this lookup thing, right? Function lookup user. Let's say, well, this is going to return a user. Always going to return a user. Let's just say return, and for now, right, because I'm lazy, I'm going to do as user to get around those errors, right? So if you just do this, it's going to say, hey, you have to add the first name, the last name, and everything else. Just for the purpose of this demo and testing purposes, I'm going to type it as the user to get around that error, right? Because I'm lazy. Don't judge me. So we're going to look up the user, right? And we're going to say, all right, let's pass in the user ID. Hang on a second, we can't do this. All right, TypeScript complains yet again. It says, hang on, user ID is expecting well, it's actually not expecting any arguments. All right, cool, no worries. Let's add a thing. So user ID. Now we're going to pass this as a string because we know it's a string. Now look, it's complaining again, saying, guys, come on, you can't pass in a user, right? We're expecting a string, right? Argument of type string user is not assignable to parameter of type string user. And it even goes deeper and tells us, right? Tells us specifics because it says the type user, right? Because remember, user ID or user can be both of these, right? So it says type user is not assignable to type string. So it even goes deeper into it and tells us the specifics. All right, so we've got a problem. What are we going to do here, team? Any ideas? We want to have this function where we can take in either one to get the password. What do you think? What do you think we should do, team?
Use the or.
Use the or?
Yeah.
Where are we going to use the or?
Like in the lookup user signature where we are using string. No, sorry, this is get password.
What to do? What should we do? Well, right. What if we go if user or user ID, right, equals string. All right, we're going to say type of. So if this is a string, right, return lookup user, user ID. Now let's also add a password on here, onto the type, sorry. Now in here, right, so we look up user and then we go dot password. Now look at this, right? It's already got this autocomplete for us. It's pretty nice. So this is another nice thing about TypeScript that you get, is because we know the lookup user is going to return a user. So whenever we try and access its properties, it already tells us what they are. In fact, you know, you want to get really fancy, guys? Let's do this. All right. If I add a little comment above here and I say, let's say it's a UUID, right? First password is hashed password, not plain text. Right. Now note, I have to do it with the double stars. If I do it with the standard one, this will not work. And what I'm showing you in a second is if I go dot password and I hover over it, look what we see here. Right, a nice little descriptor. So when someone else is using your library, or you're working in a large organization, you're like, what the hell was that property? What was that thing? What did it do again? You can add a little comment like this, and all you have to do is hover over it. It tells you user.password is a string, and it's the hash password, not the plain text. I think that's pretty cool. What do you guys think? All right. So the next part is user ID. So this is the first case, right? What's the second case? User ID dot password. And we're just going to return this. Now here's something really interesting, right? If I comment this line out, what happens? All right, so this error. It says password does not exist on the string. That's kind of the opposite of what we had before, isn't it? So TypeScript is actually very clever. And it says, look, I know that you're handling the string first. So I know that anything past this, right, user or user ID, is no longer a string anymore because you, Mr. Programmer or Mrs. Programmer, have already added that case. I think that's pretty cool. So it handles this for us. Sari says, the first time I've seen comments included in JavaScript, I guess more client-side changes. What do you mean by that, Sherry?
Well, you were saying previously that C# works on like background and things like so. I guess when you're using JavaScript, it's client side. It's on our side, like the user side, where it's changing it without having to make a call to anywhere, like to server.
Absolutely, yeah. So JavaScript was born on the client side. It's like this big thing now. It's just exploded recently. Like in the past 7 years, it's now started to shift into like the back end.
Right.
So you get Node.js and things like that. And you know that there's arguments for and against C# and Node.js on the back end. That's a larger discussion. But on the front end, you're kind of limited to TypeScript, to JavaScript, at least for now. There's some things around like WASM, WebAssembly, and various other things. That's a whole nother topic. But JavaScript is mostly client side.
And how is the security though of using JavaScript like with Node.js and React and things?
Security in what sense?
Well, they have .NET because it is a very secure as far as trying to get passwords and things and restricting so that you can't just add in things. How secure is React as far as being able to hack into it?
I mean, I would kind of say that your code is only as secure as you write it. So there are some frameworks. So there's a difference between a language and a framework. A framework can do things for you, like throw errors if you're trying to access, like if you're trying to expose passwords and things, and that's down to the framework developers, right? But a language in itself doesn't really have knowledge of that. So that's kind of a distinction between the two of them. Security-wise, I mean, you can kind of write code in however you like. It's just a set of instructions. You just tell the code what to do. Now, a framework is a pre-compiled or a pre-written set of instructions that has been tested by multiple people and lots of people agree on it. And it might be considered safer because it's already been battle tested in the world. But a language in itself doesn't necessarily have those features. It's just a set. It's just a way of writing instructions, particularly when it comes to like programming languages. SQL and a few other things, it might change a little bit. But with regards to programming, like you don't necessarily want to have too much limitation on the language itself. You want to be able to do whatever you want to do in a language. Frameworks, again, are different. You might want to lock down particular frameworks depending on a style of security that you find applicable to the problem that you're working on. But languages themselves, you want to kind of keep that open.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. Cal asks, will future versions of JavaScript eventually get similar type-related functionality? And if so, is it likely the TS syntax will be adopted? That is a great question. I don't know, and I severely hope so. I think the rise of TypeScript has been massive. It's been monumental the past couple of years because so many people, specifically people coming from a C# background or various other backgrounds, hated JavaScript. They complained and whinged about it, and rightly so, because you can do crazy things like this, right? And the community started to, that's why TypeScript, woke up, and I think there might be eventually some roadmaps for that. Let's actually have a Google. Are types coming to JS? There might be something on the roadmap.
Seems to be some discussions going on online.
Yeah. Data types. Maybe not. We'll see. I significantly hope so. There's a thing called use strict in JavaScript that makes the language stricter. That's like you can toggle on and off. Yeah, I severely hope so. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Cool. So, any questions on anything that we've covered so far? Let's do a bit of a recap. All right. So we've got these types here. We've looked at the most basic example of going from a number, trying to do it into a string, and it doesn't work. All right. Then going from a number back into a string. So the reverse. Right. Then we learned the concept of any, right? And how importing something from somewhere unknown is automatically any, and we can actually cast it as we can change it around and do whatever we want. And essentially we revert ourselves back into JavaScript at that point with a type. There's no types. So we can cast things as, using the as syntax to tell it. All right. We looked at some of the base primitives inside TypeScript, what the types are. String, number, boolean, date. We've got a null. We've also got undefined. We've looked at interfaces and how we can create a blueprint for something. Like we build a building. And they say, the architect comes on and says, I need you to build exactly like this. Right? And the developer doesn't whinge and say, no, I want to build it my way. Right? That'd be terrible, wouldn't it? The architect the engineer, right, has actually gone through and thought about it all. That's where these types come from. Right? We looked at actually creating an instance of an object that's assigned to the type. We looked at what happens if you try and change individual values, right? Or if you try to add new things, new property, right? Throws a problem. So we looked at how to lock down these things with these blueprints to make sure that we're expecting common things, We also looked at adding nice comments with the double star, right? I think in VS Code, normal comment is command slash or control slash. On Mac to do this one, it's command option slash. So it does that inline for you. Or if you just do that as well. We looked into having multiple types for a single variable and why this is useful. Saad, does that answer your question, by the way, when you originally asked that? Awesome. This is allowing us that greater flexibility of passing in either a string or the user itself. So we can see that here. We learned that TypeScript automatically infers things. So this here, right? It's not a string. It could be a string or it could be a user. But once we handle that string, TypeScript is smart enough to say, hey, I know what you are, right? You've already handled this. So I know this is going to be a user because that's the only thing that's left in this type chain. So Cal says, with an interface in TS, you've essentially defined a model. Can that model be used in relation to a database? Just looking for other advantages. I'm so glad you brought that up. Let me change gears for a second with your team. I'm gonna jump into Project CM. So we have got this structure here as an example. Right? Defining a model as a class. And that is exactly what we're expecting. And when you start using this in other places, in here, for example, I can go some function, right? And I'll go look up a thing. So I'll go this dot course, find it by the some ID, right? And then I can go C dot. Oh, this is asynchronous. Let's do this for a second. C dot, and look, I've already got these properties defined right here for us. So this actually handles it inside the database, and it handles it inside our code. Pretty cool. Are you sold on it yet, Cal? All right. Maybe this is like me trying to sell TypeScript. You guys do the languages that you feel comfortable with, but I personally highly recommend TypeScript. If you're a JavaScript user, if you're coming from a JavaScript background, if you've got other languages like Python and stuff, no worries, you do that too. But if you're just coming from purely JavaScript, this is why TypeScript might be useful. So the time is 20 past 11. Let's pause for a break. Let's come back at 1/2 past, just to give you guys an opportunity to go to the bathroom, maybe grab a quick snack, get some water. We'll come back at 1/2 past and continue on. We've got some questions around generics. So I think I'm gonna jump into some little bit more advanced stuff with you guys after the break. Sound good? All right. I'll see you all at 11:30. I'll be back in just a second.
All right, cool. See you then.
You guys excited to learn a little bit more TypeScript? All right, who's following so far? What do you think? All right, what do I need to know? Any thoughts? Anything you guys want to talk about?
No, it looks good. TypeScript seems cool. Yeah, just wondering what else is there to learn with TypeScript.
Yep. There's a lot more.
Yeah.
What has there been any aha moments for people? Like you've gone, that's that thing. I finally understand that. right? Speak up and share that because other people will definitely benefit from it.
Yeah, I think it now makes sense, like why to use it in big projects.
Yeah.
Especially, like how you can mess up the types and, especially interfaces, pretty powerful.
Yep. So Sherry asks, is it browser friendly with IE or Edge? So as I mentioned, Sherry, TypeScript is not runnable in the browser. However, the way TypeScript works is you transpile it back to JavaScript. Now we're actually gonna get into this pretty soon. I'm gonna show you guys some of the options for transpiling JavaScript, because for those who don't know, there's actually different versions of JavaScript, as there is with most languages. And for something like IE, that's actually like, assuming we're targeting something like IE 11, God forbid it's something earlier. For those who know what I'm talking about. Oof. So you can actually set a flag inside, and I'll get into this later, but you can actually set a flag inside TypeScript where you say what version you want to target. So to answer your question, Sherry, yes, it is compatible. What else, guys? What else have you guys learned so far? You're like, oh, I really like this feature. I really like this thing. I'm getting this. I'm picking this up. I'm curious.
So I'm curious about using TypeScript in relation to any testing that you might have. So let's say you don't have TypeScript and you wanted to achieve some of the things that we've been looking at.
Yep.
Would you do that through test cases in like a testing framework? Would you have some kind of preprocessor that's running through your code to do stuff that TypeScript does, like some of the things?
Assuming you don't have control over the code base, like if you're on a job.
I mean, I'm just thinking of alternatives to TypeScript if you want some of the advantages that we've been looking at.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like heavily testing, I think would really benefit. The problem with that is you add a lot more complexity to your code base. Frankie says TypeScript is like an add-on for JS to reinforce dynamic type with static type. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'd say that testing could help, but it's like if you're going to write all that code anyway, why not just put the effort in and convert it over?
Yeah.
That's kind of like if you're in a situation right now with your team or your boss and they're kind of hesitant to jump into it, this is a selling point for the business, is that it makes developers faster and it makes us write less bugs. Right? Imagine going to your boss and saying, "Hey, sir," right, or whatever his name is, right? How would you like if I could reduce our development time and debugging costs by 20%? I'm interested. Tell me more. Well, there's this thing called JavaScript, right? That you may know that we're coding in, but it's actually not very safe, right? There's this new thing that's come out. It's very similar, right? Doesn't require too much stuff, called TypeScript, right? And it makes us safer when we write a code, so we don't have to debug as much and have so many errors. How long do you think it'll take you to convert it over? And then we start getting into a discussion about it. But that would be another way tactically inside an organization. That's a real practical example that happens a lot, where you have to have that negotiation with these better technologies and how you communicate that to your superiors.
And then I guess another question arises if you're using React or Vue. How does TypeScript integrate?
Perfectly. It's like React and TypeScript like are best friends. They're biffles.
Yeah. I assume Vue similarly probably has.
Yes, absolutely.
Place,
all the major languages, like frameworks these days, they all play really nicely. Angular was built for solely TypeScript. Right? React has massive support for it. Vue, I haven't done Vue, but I'm assuming it will be the exact same thing. Node.js, it's all moving this way. I personally think, and this is kind of the reason why we're talking about it today, I personally feel like TypeScript is going to become pretty much a requirement in a lot of places, or something similar. Cool, good questions. Lee has a question.
Hey, kind of dumb, but if I were doing React with TypeScript, would the extension be .tsx, and then when I transpile it over, it'd be JSX, right?
When you transpile it would just be to JS.
Okay.
And it's not a dumb question. There's no such. What do we say here, team?
There's no dumb question.
No dumb questions. All right, you'll hear us say that a few times.
Thanks.
There's no dumb questions. Cool. All right. Any other questions before we jump back in? Okay. So let me share my screen again. You guys can see this?
Yep.
All right. So where were we? I think we had a question specifically with some of the code we were writing. It was, look. So Frank Kim asks, is there another way to return user.password without doing if type of? Not really, because we had to check the type. We don't know what it is. You might be able to say if user or user ID dot password. It's not exactly like a nice way of doing it. This is a much stronger and secure way of handling the situation. If that makes sense. Cool. All right, so we've got a couple of things we could talk about here. I think before we jump into more syntax, right? How would you guys like to see how we convert this into JavaScript? Would that be useful?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and actually open up a folder. This is all in, just going to edit this. We're actually going to do some real stuff now. There we go. So it's just this updated stuff. That's all there. So I'm going to close this file. I'm going to open up a new folder. Go into our code mentoring. Computer's a bit slow. All right, let's create a new folder. We'll call it TypeScript. And I'll put this on GitHub. All right, so, right, who's not heard of NPM before or Node.js? Who's never done that before? I just want to get a sense. Could you like actually type in the chat or speak up or something? Just because I do want to get a sense of where everyone's at with this. Never done it, says Saad. Heard of NPM, never, AD, Sherry, great. Okay, cool. So this is not going to be a Node.js tutorial. That's a whole nother system in itself. Do you guys have NPM and Node installed? Because to follow what we're about to do, you're gonna have to have Node installed on your computer. Great. So that's a question specifically for those who don't know what NPM is. Does anybody not have Node installed? Because we're going to need that before we move ahead. So if you literally just Google Node.js, it should have a link to it on all the websites. It should be pretty easy to install. Cool. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that, just so you can follow along with what we're doing today, because you will need Node.js. So again, I'm not going to jump too much into NPM and packages and stuff like that. This is more of a TypeScript tutorial. But I'm going to start off with this. This is the blank, nothing up my sleeve, right? Nothing in here. So I'm going to start off with creating a new project. Just go npm init. Now again, if you don't know what npm is and this don't worry too much. All right, so this is just going to ask us a couple of questions. In fact, to skip all through it, I'm just going to go -y to skip through all that. So for those who are not familiar with NPM, we've got this package JSON. This is very similar in Python to say requirements.txt. I know C# has its own thing. It's essentially handling all of the requirements that's going to be required for this project. Now, we're only going to have one or two very simple requirements. So you can see here we've got some information. We're gonna add a dependency to this, and the way we do that is with npm, right? I for install, and it's going to be TypeScript. I'm going to go -- save dev. And what this will do is save it as a developer dependency, not a production one. Again, if that doesn't make sense, don't worry. Frankie says if you install Node, you get an npm with it. Yes, that's a good thing to know. It's bundled together. Refusing to install. Huh? Ah, okay. It's just a strange bug. TypeScript test. Okay. So this has done a couple of things. Right. We notice this package lock. So this is going to take a long time to explain for this one. Essentially, this is the hard dependencies of everything that's required inside your project. You can pretty much ignore it. You don't have to understand it right now. It's not important. Now, we also have this folder called node modules. Now, if we're using this in Git, which we will, add a git ignore. Don't ever commit your node modules to Git, ever. Because this can get very, very, very large, and you don't need to, because remember, all the dependencies are tracked inside the package JSON. So all somebody needs to do, without the node modules folder, all they have to do is npm install, and it will read all the dependencies and install them automatically. So we do not commit this into Git. Okay, and that's pretty much it from a npm scripts, npm packages perspective. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go npx. Now, npx allows you to run the executables. So packages can create executables, and they live inside the .bin folder. So you can see here we've got this TSC, TypeScript compiler. So the way we run that is with npx. Now we can run that because we've installed it as a dev dependency. So if we go npx tsc TypeScript compiler, we're going to go -- init. Message ts successfully created a ts config JSON file. What is this? What is this magic? Right. Let's have a look. We have a lot of things in here. Right. A lot of settings. Now, if you're new to TypeScript, right, none of this is going to make sense. You've got lib, allow.js, JSX, declaration. What's a declaration? Right, source maps, out files, composites. Right, some of them make sense, like removing comments. That makes sense, right? But some of these other ones, import helpers, down level iteration, forget about it. Right, you don't need to know all this stuff. They've got descriptions for them here, but you don't need. If you look at this and you go, oh my god, I do not understand any of this. Don't worry, team. It's okay. You don't need to know all this to begin with. Over time, we'll start to expand out and we'll introduce some of these things, but you don't need, I don't even know what all of these do. I'd have to Google some of these. So don't worry, right? We're actually going to remove all of them, the ones that aren't needed, and just keep it simple to make it a little bit less scary for you guys. I'm gonna leave these comments in so you guys can see them. All right, so what have we got? Why is this got a bug? Colon expected? That might just be types. What's going on here? Must be some, accidentally added that in. Okay, so remember guys, TypeScript in itself cannot be used like directly in the browser. So what we often do is, where do we generally put things, team? In like things that are going to get changed over. What directory do we generally put them in? Anybody know?
Package JSON?
No. So the package JSON is the dependencies. I'm talking about the source code that we're going to write. What folder do we generally put source code under?
SRC?
Yeah, SRC for source. Right, this is where all of our code is going to live. Right? So the source code, this is where all of our TypeScript is going to go inside here. So let's just say we create a file called index.ts. Now, what's a simple example? Maybe, you know what? I'm gonna grab this previous file. I'll put it in here. Fix up some of the errors. Cool. Just add some of those spaces that we lost when we put it into Slack. All right, cool. So what we want to do, this is the process that we're about to go through right now, right? Is some people have asked, how do we run this in the browser? Well, we can't run this natively in the browser, can we? Because it's TypeScript. So we have to go through some process of transmuting it, like alchemy, transforming it into something else. So that's what this TypeScript compiler does for us, this thing that we just installed, right? And that's what this tsconfig is used for. It reads this stuff in here. It says, these are the settings when we convert it into TypeScript, and back into JavaScript. So we see here, there's one called target. This specifies, right, whether it's one of these ones. We can use very old JavaScript, or we can use the latest stuff, latest and greatest fandangled stuff, right? We've got a module system. So when we're importing and exporting things, which one are we going to use, right? Depending on whether you're using Node.js or the front end, or, you know, typically you set it to common for the front end. That's a pretty common one that we use, no pun intended. Strict, so this enables the strict type checking. So it's very strict to make sure it's very safe for us. This one, forget about it. This one is just making sure that in TypeScript, if we import different files, that the name, when we import the name, it matches the file name, case sensitive. So you probably want to have that on, because if you're running this in like a Linux system on the production, Linux is case sensitive. For example, Mac is not, or Windows. I don't know what about Windows. So that's probably a good thing to have turned on by default, just so you don't get some strange errors in the future. And that's pretty much it. There's some good default options. Do we have any questions around anything we've covered so far? I know this one is a little bit confusing. Forget about that for now. Just kind of set it and forget it. You don't need to know what it does at this point. Is Chocolaty necessary? It's not necessary, but I recommend it if you're running on Windows. So Chocolaty, for those who do not know what Chocolaty is like, it's like a package manager, or like a program, the way to install things from the command line really nicely. It's kind of like what Brew is for those who are on Mac, and it's kind of like apt-get on Linux, or APK. It's the same concept. And I think for Windows, it's good. So Saad asks, what is strict true checking exactly? I think it actually does like null checks and any checks. So remember how before we had like is any, and it kind of goes back to JavaScript because there's no type inference. I'm pretty sure that's what strict does. It says don't have any class, any types, and things like that. If that answers your question, Saad. I could be wrong. I'd have to Google it, but I'm pretty sure that's what it does. Cool. Okay, so how do we do this? Right, we've looked at what we have to do to do this, but how do we actually do this? Well, in NPM, right, we've got this nice little thing in here called scripts. Now, this is a nice way of aliasing things. It's kind of like a make file or a bat file for those who are familiar with it. I can come in here and I can go build. Now, in build, I can have whatever I want. I can say echo hello code mentoring. Right. Some quotations. And if I go npm run build, right, run something inside here. There you go. Hello code mentoring, which is pretty cool. So what we're actually going to do is obviously not say this, but I'm going to say TSC, TypeScript compiler. Remember, that's going to grab inside the node modules. It's going to run this, right, this thing inside here. And that is going to compile our project for us. So let's try this. All right, yarn, npm run build. Okay, so we're getting some problems. Sophie says, hi guys, this looks awesome, but only just joined this week. I'm quite lost. I'm going to drop off now and watch week 1. Cool, nice meeting you all. Thanks, Sophie. This probably was a little bit more advanced today, so I do apologize. Definitely come on Wednesdays if you're more of a beginner, where Shane and Frankie go through some beginner stuff, more around like HTML and CSS. Is a really great place to start. So I do apologize if this was a little bit more advanced. That is at 7 p.m. every Wednesday. And again, it's completely free. We're not asking for anything. Go to our meetup page. All the information is on there. I do apologize if this was a little bit advanced, Sophie. But thanks for sticking around. Thanks for coming. And hopefully you'll see you at the next one. Okay, so this is trying to import this something here. Now, obviously that doesn't exist because we haven't installed that. So we'll comment that out. We're just going to comment on all the things that are causing problems for us. We've got this, let's just call this first name, just so we can get it to compile. I think that's pretty good. See you, Sophie. Thanks for coming. All right, so let's try this again. Okay. What do we notice, team? Who can tell me what we see? What's new?
Index.ts got created. No, index.js.
.js.
Yeah.
The gold has been transmuted. Not gold, the lead. Sorry, the lead has been transmuted into gold. All right, it's even yellow for us. It's kind of cool. Okay. So let's have a look. All right. What we got? So notice there's a lot of things are different. For example, right, this guy's been removed, hasn't he? All right. What else has been removed?
Types.
Types, they're all gone. What else? That's probably it for this example. Right, sometimes it'll do like indenting and formatting. Sometimes it'll do some other fancy transpolations. Dwayne says the var has been added. Dwayne, that's a really good point.
It's on ES5.
ES5. Right? Let's say, actually, I'm only going to support modern browsers. We can bump this up, can't we? Let's target something newer. Let's say ES 2020. Now I'm going to copy this out just so you can see the difference. Now let's rebuild it. Watch what happens. Watch the file change before our eyes. There you go. So everything's been converted into new stuff. In fact, let's do a more obvious example. Let's use a syntax, the arrow function, right, which I don't think is supported in ES5. Log hello. So let's go back to ES5. All right. Now in our index, right, it should not show as an arrow function. There you go. It's been converted. So TypeScript does all that handling for us, which means we can write future JavaScript and convert it back into old JavaScript. Very, very nice. And just by simply changing one thing, we can get an entire build for a different browser or a different platform, right? Whether it's Node.js or the browser, or if we're running it inside Raspberry Pi, or I don't know. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can figure there. But who can tell me a problem with this situation we got going on here? Yeah, way more power, Cal, than just type checking. It does a lot of things. Better reasons. Perhaps. You can still use Babel. I think Babel and TypeScript now have a pretty good integration now too. But who can tell me, right? Where, as Rajat pointed out, this got put into the source folder. Right? Do we really want that?
You want to, I guess, build it in like a separate folder, like a build or this.
Yes. Right. We don't want to commit our JavaScript to Git. It's all TypeScript. So what do we do here, team? Who knows? For those who do know TypeScript, who can tell me? What do we need to change? Any guesses?
I think you're going to need to add an output.
Like it goes to output to go to a different folder.
Ah. So if we go out dir for directory, do we think that'll work? What do we commonly use as a directory for build files, team?
Build folder.
Sometimes. I think more commonly, what do we use?
I've already seen dist.
Dist for distribution. Right, this is what we're going to distribute out to the rest of the servers or wherever we're deploying it to. Let's try this again. Boom. So let's just delete this one inside here to make sure it's working. All right. And there we go. Now what do we do with our dist folder? What's our rule?
Add it to Git ignore.
Add it to Git ignore. Same with node modules. You don't ever commit that to Git. Jeff says, got to run. Hope everyone has had a blessed weekend. Review again when this goes up on YouTube. See you, mate. Thanks for coming.
Yes.
Say to me. I lost you for a second, mate. All good. So, right, now we've learned how to go from TypeScript into JavaScript. That's pretty cool, team. That's pretty cool. Now, let's say, right, when we build this into JavaScript, we want other people to be able to use the types that we have inside our library. But we can see here all the types got stripped out, didn't they? So what are we going to do here, team? What do we think? How do we fix this? All right, I'll give you a more practical example. Let's actually export something. Let's export the get password. So we can use it. Let's say this is a library that we're building. So we're going to export function get password. And we'll just remove that arrow. Oh, and we'll just export that for now as well. We'll do both. We'll export both of these things. Now let's rebuild it. All right. So you can see here, it's converted this into the exports automatically. It's added some strange stuff at the top. All right. Let's say if we change the we change this into something else like UMD. Let's see what the exports look like. Whoa, look at all this crap. Right? It's a whole bunch of, it's wrapped in a function. It's done all sorts of crazy stuff to it, right? So this allows us to change how we're importing and exporting things. I'm going to set it back to CommonJS. So we're still losing all of our types. Right? Let's say, as a pretend example, we have a JavaScript file. We want to import, so we're going to go const get password equals require, and we're going to grab it from the dist like this. Get password. All right, see how this says any? We don't know how to use this. We're going back to the same problem that we had. So what do we do, team? Does anybody know? We're using this as the dist. Now this wouldn't really sit inside an index.js file in the same project. It would usually sit in another project, right? Where you're requiring this one. So, but just for the sake of what we're doing, we'll keep it simple. But what do we do, team? What do we do about this? We've lost all of our types. It's great when we're building it, but what about everybody else who's using our project? What do we do? Does anybody have any idea how to fix this problem? Okay. So, we'll come back to our TS config. Have file for this. What do you mean by that, Sherry? A file for this?
Just a separate like global file that could probably be used with all your declarations.
Ah. Now, is this something that you want to write yourself?
Ideally, you wouldn't want to write it yourself.
Ideally,
want to.
Ideally,
want it to
wouldn't it be nice if TypeScript compiled that for us?
Yes.
Wouldn't it be nice if there was a declaration setting? We could just set to true.
That'd be awesome.
That would be awesome. Let's see if it works. Oh, look what we've got here, team. .d.ts. D for definitions. Now, this is linked. These names have to be the same. Otherwise, when you're importing it, and all the code editors and things like that, they expect it to be the same name. So does TypeScript. Look at this. All right, it's generated this file for us automatically. And look, it's even exported. It's we didn't export user. The only thing we exported were these two things. It's automatically told us and pulled out, sucked out all the things that it needs from the file and put it into this. And look, it's even kept our comments. That's pretty cool. So let's go back to our JavaScript that we're doing. Now, if we do get password, look at that. String or user.
Aha.
That is pretty sexy. This is in JavaScript, team. This is not in TypeScript anymore. Yeah, even my categories with me. All right, I don't know if you guys heard that little meow. It was kind of cute.
Yeah, we heard that.
I heard it. Yeah.
So this is pretty exciting, right? Even now, JavaScript developers can use your TypeScript project, and it's even better, right? This is a strong use case, team, to build your project in TypeScript, especially if it's going to be used by other people, right? Your cat answered back, Catcher. I love it. That's adorable. Maybe they should have a conversation after this. So guys, you're starting to see the power of TypeScript, aren't you? Starting to see how safe it can get and how much it saves you in so many different things. Because in JavaScript, right, I could just come in here and I could put in a number, right? But now with this type inference, it says, actually, we're going to expect a user. So let's put in a string, right? That's fine. What happens if we do this? It's even pulling in the user type. That's pretty cool, team. Again, this is in JavaScript. This is not in TypeScript. So because remember, it's expecting either a string or it's expecting an object. And if we pass in the object, it automatically knows that the object type is going to be a user. And look, we could even like hover over these things and click on them. And like, if I press F12, it'll take me to it automatically. All right. Address 123. Let's try and set it to something else, right? Now, this is why in JavaScript, you're allowed to do this in JavaScript, right? This is expecting a string. So it's not going to complain because this is JavaScript, but we do get that type inference, which is nice, right? What else have we got? Password. In fact, I think even if we hover over, we still get our comments, team, in JavaScript. So if you're writing a plugin, if you're writing a library, if you're writing a framework for other people, please, please, please consider writing it inside TypeScript for the benefit of the rest of the community. Saad asks, Sherry asks first, does it create dist files at folder levels? What do you mean by folder levels?
Well, as you, this is more of like a global sort of one that is described. But if you create another folder under source and
yes. You know what? That's a great question. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a lib folder. And we'll call it get password. .ts. And we'll grab this guy that we had here. I'm assuming this is what you're asking. We'll have lookup user. .ts. All right, this is actually what I'd do, team, in a real life thing. All right, export. Now we're getting some problems because the user stuff, right? This doesn't exist inside here, but we're also using it here too. Crap! What do we do? Well, let's create a types file, and you can actually export types to this or interfaces. Let's grab this user, put him in here, and we'll go export. Right, export interface user. So all I'm doing, team, is I'm just refactoring this stuff. So now inside here, if I go user, right? See how VS Code has got a whole bunch of autocomplete for us? Auto import. If I just press enter, and here, it automatically pulls that in for us. Here's another one, lookup user. Right? Just press enter. This is the benefit of TypeScript, team. Even the code editor gets excited. All right. Look up user again. Do the same thing here. Cool. Now we can remove this. All right. Get password. Let's import that. From the top, user, import that automatically. What else we got? I think that's it. Right, now what happens if we build it? Let's delete this dist folder and see what happens. So this should answer your question, Sherry, along with a few other questions. Boom. So now look, we've got this lib folder, and each of the files gets their own declaration. That's pretty cool. Right? Now we've got a problem in that in our JavaScript file, this doesn't exist anymore. See how it's gone back to any? Who can tell me why? Who can tell me in this file why that's the case? We're importing it, aren't we? We're importing it, but are we exporting it? Are we exporting this function, team? We're not. So let's actually do that as well. Export like this. So importing it so we can use it in this file, but we're also exporting it. So now, if I rebuild it, I come back to my JavaScript. There it is again, once again, safe and sound. So this is how TypeScript compiles itself. And you'll notice, right, it's actually handling all these requires for us and doing all these fancy things, right? Let's change the module to something else, like you went back to the UMD thing that we had before. All right, run this again, see what it looks like now. Whoa, all sorts of stuff's going on. So you don't have to handle the module stuff yourself, guys. It's really cool. And then this can safely be exported, and away you go. That's your library done, basically. So you don't have to worry about JavaScript at all. Yeah, so it's a very nice way to handle this. Any questions on anything we've just done with that refactoring and definition files? Why they're needed, how they benefit you. I think we're kind of getting a sense for it now that we're using it inside the JavaScript file. But do you guys have anything you guys confused about? Anything you want me to recover? Who's excited?
Yeah, Tristan, I think last part was a little bit confusing where we were losing the types and then you imported and exported at the same time.
Yeah, so that's the same actually in normal JavaScript as well, is if you're not exporting that file, you can't import it from another place. So you just need to make sure that we're using it inside this file down here, right? Or we also want to export it. If I wanted to inside here, instead of getting it from this, like I could remove this, rebuild it so it doesn't exist, just to prove it again. All right, so in the dist, all right, we're not exporting it from here. Right, there's no exporting of that function. And then in JavaScript, I can instead go into /lib/getPassword. This is another way of doing it. Now it's available. See here? Now it's available. But if I don't export it from here, right, I can't do this method where it's just from the /dist. It's not available there. We haven't told it to say, hey, expose this from this file. It's a little trick on exporting. and importing the modules. Does that make sense, Rajat?
Yeah, that's interesting pattern. Yeah.
Yep. It's pretty standard for most programming languages. It's a pretty common pattern, modules and whatnot. Any other questions on anything we've covered, team? If possible, could you please answer my above question? Saad says, sorry, didn't see that, Saad. Why was get password removed in the first place when converting to JS? And how will it be usable in JS by others if it is not intended as JS syntax? I'm a little confused by your question. Why was the password removed in the first place? We're not removing it. We just moved it into this file here. So all the lib functions, right, they're living inside this own folder to answer Sherry's question about how we do nested things. And also this is what you do in practice as well. So it's not removed. Does that kind of answer your question, Saad? I'm not quite sure exactly what you're asking. If possible, they're kind of, okay. So, and how it will be used in JS by others if it is not intended as JS syntax. Well, that's the idea behind the transpilation, is that we write it in TypeScript so it's safer as developers, and then we convert it into JavaScript so it can be used by everybody. That's the intention behind TypeScript. So hopefully that answers your question. Neil says, are there benefits in exporting the get password function in two places? Yeah, that's honestly just how you want to organize your library, right? You might decide, and it's very common for a lot of libraries, to export it in both. So you'll have a lib folder here. So there we have it. So we can import it directly like this, or what's called a re-export, just from the root. You re-export everything that you've used in the library from one place. That's a really common pattern, if that answers your question, Neil. Lee says, I wasn't too clear on the dist folder. Why dist folder and why are we ignoring it? That's a great question, Lee. So the dist folder is purely generated automatically from our TypeScript folder, right? From the source folder. So everything inside source is TypeScript. Everything inside dist is JavaScript. And you don't include the dist because you don't need to add it in Git. Anybody who has these files can automatically build it. And the dist can get quite large. So we don't actually need to add the dist into GitHub, if that answers your question. TypeScript is not usable by browser, says Sherry. Yep. Rajat says this folder will actually go into production when you deploy it. So that's what it's used for. That's why we have it. Sherry says, yep, cool. TypeScript must be transformed into JavaScript. What else have we got? Katya says she's a bit lost, so she'll bow out today. Sorry that it was a bit over your head, Katya. Hopefully come back on Wednesday. Cool. What else have we got? All right, this one is more advanced actually. The problems listed above an issue. What do you mean by that, Saad? Are the problems listed above? Which problems? At the bottom. I'm not sure.
Hey, Tristan, there's a question as well from Sherry about, well, I'm not sure if it was a question, but she mentioned that TypeScript is not usable in the browser. I know you mentioned before that it has to be transformed to JavaScript.
Yeah, that's this whole transpilation process.
Right.
So it's going into the dist, and then the dist is used inside the browser. I'm not sure what these problems oh, these things here? Cool. So I think that's just from JavaScript. They're not an issue. You can forget about that. That's fine, Saad. Yeah. I think most of these are just like spell checks and various other things. I got a spell checker in here, so. Great. Katya, already know HTML, CSS, maybe too beginner. I need an intermediate course. Katja, if you're still here, we're launching a Thursday one, which is going to be more of a deep dive. So it's not as beginner focused on like beginner Wednesdays, but it's going to have a little bit more of like a focus on deep dive. We'll do things like TypeScript. We're going to do things like design. We're going to do a whole bunch of other things. So definitely stay tuned for Thursday. We're going to kick that off this week, which we're excited about. Cool. So we've covered a lot today, team. I think I'm going to kind of close it up here and give it over to questions, because I think I've soaked your brains enough and saturated you enough with this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and quickly add this to GitHub for you so you guys can see it. So again, this is going to be under our code mentoring GitHub. Create a new repository. We'll call it TypeScript intro. Introduction to TypeScript. Public. All right. Git remote add origin. Get init first. And we'll add all these files in. There you go, team. That's up on GitHub for you. So you guys can have a look at that yourself. It's all here. So I just want to give it over to you guys now to see, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, to see what questions you guys have, what you think about this, if you're thinking about using this on your own personal project. I'm curious, team, like what are our thoughts? What do I need to know?
So yeah, I'm thinking about exploring it for my own personal app and then at work as well.
Mm-hmm.
I want to avoid having to learn another thing. Now, in terms of the type checking and all that, I don't care about that so much because I just go along and just make sure my code works. I don't know, but all the other benefits, that attracts me.
Great.
So
it's more like the transpilation and like the handling of modules and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to know that essentially none of this occurs in the client side.
Yeah.
So this is basically just a tooling thing.
Just a tooling thing, correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. And yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's good to know. It's nice to know what other people's motivations are for using technology. What else we got, team? For those who have been using TypeScript for a while or have recently made the transition across, like Susie or Rajat or a few other people here have been working on Project CM, how have you found the transition yourself?
Still transitioning.
Yep.
Yeah.
But how have you found it? How's the move been?
I would say like pretty okay so far, but yeah, there's always a lot which like sounds foreign. So then like you look it up and, you know, as you do it, bits and pieces start making more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a process that you go through. I think some people have asked before, like, what's the best way to learn it? Take a code base in JavaScript that you're really familiar with, that you wrote yourself, a small one, and then convert the whole thing into TypeScript. That's a really good way to do it. I've done that a couple of times, and it's a really good practice to learn how to convert things into to TypeScript and why it's needed, and then you start to see, oh wow, all these bugs that I actually found because I converted it across. So that's a really good way to learn it. But what else, team? Like, I'm curious. Like, is there anyone here that's like, I actually don't want to use this? It's just not really the kind of thing I'm interested in. I think Sherry seems pretty sold on C#, so she might not find TypeScript that useful, and that's fair. Like, C# is a great language.
And what about like if you're doing something simple in front end and you just write JavaScript in a browser?
Yeah.
reads it straight away. Like, so the TypeScript, what there's an overhead, right? Because you have to do the transforming. You showed us in the dist.
So the overhead really is only from a tooling perspective. There's no overhead in terms of code and in the performance. It's purely just for, like, if you're building out a larger project, TypeScript kind of becomes almost necessary, because like, depending on how large the project is, working on a really large JavaScript base is messy. It's very messy. Another thing, like really simply, another thing you can do, for example, is because everything is so linked in types, if you want to, for example, rename, we're doing some refactoring, if you want to rename a variable or rename a property on an object, all you do is press F2, rename it inside VS Code, and everywhere across your entire application, that variable changes. Good luck trying to do that. Good luck trying to do that in JS. Now, Sherry will say, yeah, but C# had that for ages. I know, Sherry. Shh. But as JavaScript developers, we're excited for what we're doing. We're still catching up to you guys doing these other things. Give us some time. Cool. What else have we got, team?
Tristan, in subsequent weeks, we'll continue this TypeScript because it's a big topic, right? Like, interesting features in this.
I think we should probably do something different on Saturday, but I can do like Thursday night deep dives into it if people are interested in specific features. For example, one question today I think that Lee asked, and Lee, I'm sorry I didn't get to it today. I feel like it was kind of, we had enough content, was generics. Generics are something that is, you kind of have to have a bit of an understanding of types first before we jump into like that kind of syntax and that way of thinking. It's a very meta way of looking at code that I think you guys should have a little bit more experience in TypeScript before we jump into that. So we can do that another time if people are interested in. Probably like on Thursday or something. Thursdays are going to be very topical. So it's going to be like, hey, come and join us for this very specific thing. You might not find that you want to, you may decide to come to all of them, and we hope you do, but you might not find necessarily that all of them are relevant to you, depending on what you like to learn and what you do. Like, for example, we might have one night that's on Python, introduction to Python, and I might even do like a basic machine learning course to show you guys how to do some really, really.
I was thinking even like programming
other things,
fundamentals, right? Like data structures,
fundamentals,
algorithms, these things.
Yeah, things like that. There's so many possibilities, team. So yeah, but I think unless anybody has, oh, hang on. Sab says, I think CM is an amazing initiative. What was your inspiration to start this? I'm going to answer that in a second. Somebody asked SQL. I'm not the best at SQL, but I can certainly skill up for it. So yes, we can do an SQL. Shopify uses React and does shopping carts. Algorithms, says Susie. I hate them, but I need to learn them. Yes, I agree. I hate them too. What's HTML, says Cal. Yeah, go home, Cal. You're like me, mate.
See you on Wednesday,
You're like
Cal.
me. See you on Wednesday, Cal. So, guys, I think officially, let's close this webinar down. Frankie, if you want to stop recording, guys, let's just